So we're very excited to welcome DeAndre D. Marshall here today. She's going to discuss some information and content about sex and labor trafficking and different training opportunities that she can provide to your different regional collaboratives. So I will pass it over to DeAndre, and we're so grateful to have you here, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate you having me in this space. I'm so excited to be with Resilient Georgia today. This is a long time coming. We've been planning this for a while, but I'm excited to present to you today. And hopefully something that you hear will prompt you to want to invite us out to present to those within your sphere of influence, either online or actually I'm doing in persons now. So in case you're in the office, I'm available to come and travel and spend time with you, because this is a subject that is important. We all know that human trafficking, both labor and sex trafficking, are travesties that are happening around our state. And so today I'm not going to take long talking about who I am or what I do. I'm going to actually present a training to you. It's the Learn, See, Do Something training that actually was created over 3 years ago now by the International Human Trafficking Institute, for which I was the director of training and programs. And our goal at that time was to actually train 50,000 people across the state of Georgia on how to recognize both labor and sex trafficking. And we were able to train 50,000 people. Even in the midst of the pandemic, we were able to transfer and pivot and train via the internet virtually. So initially I started out training in person and went then to doing this via Zoom. Want to give just a little shout out to one person and to the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, who actually, because they saw my passion for this work, and decided that they would gift me the intellectual properties of the center, for which I am eternally grateful. And then the other shout out is to my mentor and friend, Deborah Richardson, who was the person who brought me into this work again. I've been doing this for 20 years, you guys, but I started out as an art therapist working for the first safe home in Georgia, which was called Angela's House. So if any of you all know about Angela's House, I was there when they opened that house to talk to those girls who were previously thought to be prostitutes. So I want you to understand that in this day and age, anyone under the age of 18 who is being coerced or lured into sex trafficking can no longer be arrested in the state of Georgia for prostitution. So those are some things that have happened as we've gone along. But what we're going to do today is just talk about recognizing the signs of labor and sex trafficking, understanding the role of market demand in all forms of trafficking. So we talk about this in the instance of this being big business. And that's the way that I look at this, because if it were not for big business, this would not continue. But looking at it as big business, and then talking to you all about how to take action to make human trafficking unacceptable in the state of Georgia. So this is our Learn, See, Do Something training. We actually offer other trainings under EnligHTEn Talks. If you're interested in any of those, we talk to parents, we talk to college students, high school students, middle school students, as well as children. We have an age-appropriate training for children as well on how to keep themselves safe online. Most times when you talk about human trafficking, you will hear people talk about it in the instance of removing and restoring victims, or how to stop the trafficker. But what we talk about today is the predator's influence in this, and how they are actually the people who are responsible for trafficking happening. So really, you guys, if we could get at the predator in all of this, then we would be able to curtail, eradicate, however you want to look at it, to stop human trafficking. So the predator is at the bottom of this. If you can see my hand, the predator is at the bottom of this. The trafficker is the distributor, because he or she is distributing the victims, who in this instance, they become the supply in both labor and sex trafficking. So here are your objectives today as we go forward. We want to talk about vulnerable people, and then I'll explain who vulnerable people are and how they are lured into this, especially our children and our youth. We talk about demanding prevention. Why are we demanding prevention? And who are we talking about? So we talk about the predators and how most times they are allowed anonymity. So that means that they can sometimes get arrested, not all of the time, but they can get arrested. But when they are arrested, they have expendable income. And so they are able to pay monies and they can get themselves out of those situations. A lot of times predators' families don't even know that they have been caught up in a predatory human trafficking system. They just go home and, just start all over again. And then you guys can become aware of your own consumer habits. This means that sometimes you may not even know it, but you are doing things that contribute to human trafficking. So what is human trafficking? And I want to make sure that I give you a working definition of this. So let's take a listen to what human trafficking is as far as Polaris is concerned.
What is human trafficking? Human trafficking is modern-day slavery. It is the exploitation of a person through force, fraud, or coercion. Human smuggling and human trafficking are different crimes. Human smuggling is the illegal movement of someone across a border. Human trafficking is the illegal exploitation of a person. Human trafficking is about exploitation, not transportation. Human trafficking is a highly profitable crime and a violation of human rights. It occurs in every part of the world, including here in the United States. It happens in our big cities, our suburbs, and even in rural towns. It can happen to anyone. Human trafficking victims can be US citizens or from other countries. Victims can be any age, race, or gender. But one thing they share is that they are vulnerable to being exploited. There are different types of human trafficking, including sex trafficking, forced labor, and domestic servitude. Sex trafficking victims are manipulated or forced against their will to engage in sex acts for money. Sex traffickers might use violence, threats, manipulation, or the promise of love and affection to lure victims. Truck stops, hotel rooms, rest areas, street corners, clubs, private residences. These are just some of the places where victims are forced to sell sex. Any person under the age of 18 involved in a commercial sex act is considered a victim of human trafficking. No exceptions. Forced labor takes on many forms, and it happens here in the US and overseas. Through force, fraud, or coercion, victims are made to work for little or no pay. Very often, these victims are forced to manufacture or grow the products that we use and consume every day. Victims of forced labor could be found in factories, on farms, doing construction work, and more. Victims of domestic servitude are hidden in plain sight, forced to work in homes across the United States. Their traffickers sometimes take their identification papers and travel documents in order to limit their freedom. They are prisoners, working as nannies, maids, or domestic help. Every year in the United States, thousands of human trafficking cases are reported, but many more go unnoticed. That's because human trafficking is a hidden crime. Victims might be afraid to come forward, or we may not recognize the signs, even if it's happening right in front of us. We need to bring this crime out of the shadows. That's why the Department of Homeland Security created the Blue Campaign, to take a stand against modern-day slavery and help combat this heinous crime.
And that's the reason why it's important for people to continue to come to conversations like this to talk about what human trafficking is and what it's not. So listen, I have something called classroom participation. I know you didn't expect it, but here it is. So I need somebody to come on off of your speaker and tell me, what did you hear is the difference between smuggling and trafficking? What's the main difference that you heard? Let's not be shy.
I would say the main difference is smuggling is just bringing someone to a place,
Okay.
not necessarily anything being forced upon them.
Okay. So when you hear the trafficking, you say that that's the forced upon them, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Who is that talking to me?
My name is Corral.
Did you say Corinne?
Corral.
Okay. So can you, Emily, make a note because I want to get them something in the mail. Because with classroom participation, you get incentives. So listen, I appreciate you for voicing your opinion about that, and you're spot on. When we talk about smuggling versus trafficking, people need to understand that smuggling actually involves transporting. Whereas with the trafficking part, you have people who are being exploited for something or other. And at the bottom of that, it always is about money. So when we talk about that, we want to talk about that in the instance of labor trafficking first. So you're going to learn something, see something, and do something as far as labor trafficking is concerned. So 80% of human trafficking is in labor trafficking, and people don't recognize that because, you see it happening in front of you, but you don't know what it is. So when we talk about labor trafficking, it's in construction, hospitality, and leisure, janitorial services, and landscaping. And because you're joining me from all over the state of Georgia, you could possibly have some of this happening in your communities. In this presentation, I have something that happened down in South Georgia around onions and slave labor. And I will never look at an onion the same way again, but if we had not seen this come through the news media, we would not know that this is happening. You'll see other instances as we go along to talk about what's happening around labor trafficking in the state of Georgia. Now, when we look at this globally, you will see that we talk about this in the instance of our children. So what we know is that when we talk about the labor trafficking of our young people, our kids, we're talking about the instance where 152 million children in 2016 were involved in child labor. And you may ask me, DeAndre, why don't you have newer statistics? Because the video told you this is a hidden crime. So we're not able to get statistics as often as we would like. What we know is that 73 million children were involved in child labor. And you're talking about huge numbers here. 58% were boys. And that's not to say that girls are not involved in this. I'll show you girls as we go along, but 48% were below the age of 12. So we're talking about children. We're not talking about, like young adults who are involved in this instance of labor trafficking. And a lot of them were working in agriculture, and there are different reasons for that happening. I want to bring this a little bit closer to metro cities and talk about traveling sales. So this is just one area of labor trafficking that happens. But this happens primarily with teenage boys who are being recruited to do different things in cities. And what they're promised is an opportunity to travel the world and to make a lot of money. And what I'm here to tell you all today is that that is not what happens. What happens is these kids are lured into selling things like magazines, candy, water. All of those things happen, and they only get to keep 20% of what they earn. And if they don't learn the jargon, if they don't learn the language, a lot of times they are beaten. Sometimes they are left in places where they don't know, how to to get around. And so they fall prey to another form of trafficking to make ends meet, to have housing, to have food, because it's hard for them to get back home. And so what I want to point out, if you can look a little closer into this slide, you'll see a little kid standing on a corner. This is in Metro Atlanta. This was last summer. And he was selling, can anybody tell me what he's selling? Anybody know what this kid is selling?
Water.
Gatorade
Water.
Bottled water.
So I'm in somebody's lane. You've seen this. Somebody has seen this. This was in East Point. But what I am talking about here is our previous mayor she put together a group of people to talk about how to address water bottle sales in Metro Atlanta. When she did this, she was talking about kids who were over the age of 18 who maybe had been in the system. What I want to present to you all today is the fact that there are young kids who are being trafficked because we know that this kid could not get a full container of ice and water to that corner to sell it, because these kids are not going to sell you hot water. You're going to have a cold bottle of water. This in itself is a form of trafficking. You know, it's not the trafficking of the body, but it is the beginning of teaching kids how to earn money doing things like selling water on the corners. And this parlays itself into other things. So once they teach these kids how to sell this water, the next thing they'll teach them how to do is how to drive, because they want them to do what? Steal cars. And why do they want them to steal cars, Elliot? I hear you talking to me. Why do they want them to steal cars?
It's more money.
More money. And you got one more thing I want you to tell me. If a kid gets caught stealing a car, what happens?
Well, he might get that taken away because they're a minor, but
Exactly.
with being a minor, you know, different laws apply.
All right, Elliot. Elliot's talking to me and he's spot on. Elliot, you are so right. When a kid is arrested, he's going to juvie. He's not going to jail. And he's going to get out like really quickly. But when you have an adult who steals a car, they're going to get some time. And so what I'm saying to you is that we have to be very cautious and keep our eyes open as far as these situations are happening. And I will tell you that there are ways to report this without causing, a big ruckus around a kid getting arrested. So what you do, if you see this happening in your community, don't call 911. We want you to call the precinct and report that this is happening in your community, okay? Does everybody have that? So that's the way we handle that. Now, 3 years ago, IHTI actually sat with the Georgia Aquarium and sponsored something that is going to blow your mind. Take a listen to what's happening in our seafood industry.
Cases where people do something to anger the captain, where they fail to perform, they are killed. They're killed and thrown overboard. And then
Phil Robertson is Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch Asia. He estimates that roughly 20% of the fishermen on Thai commercial boats are enslaved, though the Thai government insists those numbers have improved.
American consumers need to be aware that they could be consuming products made with forced labor if they're buying Thai seafood. They're supporting an industry that is still benefiting from the abuse and the exploitation of people who are not free to leave.
That's similar to the vessels they used to fish on? Min Nang is a former slave. He says he spent more than 5 years trapped and abused on Thai fishing boats. We met him in Yangon, Myanmar.
Whenever we were in port, they shackled me. They unlocked me only when the boat left. When the boat returned to shore, I had to unload the fish, and I got chained again on the front end of the boat, whether it was sunny or rainy.
Nang shows us scars. One where he says a captain stabbed him with a stingray tail. So that was deep. And another where his head was cracked with an iron pipe. a wound closed with 22 stitches by a fellow crewman.
Does he know what happened to his friend who helped treat him with the injury?
He felt like he was hopeless and he was not being treated well by the Thai captain and supervisor. So finally, he killed himself by drinking something, and then I saw the body was thrown into the water. Like many enslaved fishermen, Meng was smuggled into Thailand by crooked brokers who promised him a good job in a factory.
Instead of rolling up to the factory, they roll into a fishing port. You know, the guy gets out and he's in a warehouse. A couple young toughs come and control him. They lock him somewhere. He's done for. That's it.
So listen, what I want to say to you all at this point about the slave labor that's happening in the seafood industry, this is not to deter anyone from, purchasing seafood, but what we want to be aware of is that a portion of what's happening on the seafood, on the waters, is that people are being used as slaves so that we can have what we want to eat. And that's based on supply and demand. The other thing I want to tell you is so that you will know, this is a can of tuna that I purchased at Walmart. And I'm showing you the can because I want you to see that when you go to buy seafood, one way to be assured that what you're eating is what you want to eat is that you see this label that says certified sustainable seafood. You want to look for that label. So that guarantees you that this tuna, this is actually tuna in this can, because based on supply and demand, especially as it is right now, having the pandemic happen, is that sometimes we may be buying seafood, but it's not what we want in the can. So that's like your salmon and any type of seafood that comes in a can, you want to be aware of that. The other thing is that it also happens with fresh seafood. If you can see that, that is a salmon that I bought from Sam's. So both ways, you want to make sure that you're getting certified sustainable seafood, which means that you're eating what you want to eat and not something that, has been produced, has been dyed to look like, it's like a whitefish that they'll dye to look like what you want to have. So just to be aware of that, that's one of your to-dos, having been here today. So the other thing that I want to talk about for both men and women who are in this training today is talking about our nails and our hair. I'm not going to play this video, but what I do want you to know that there's an element of trafficking happening in our nail salons and in our hair salons. And while all of these have regulations around it, like that, there are people who are supposed to be checking to make sure that the people who are running these places have re-upped their certification. There are not a lot of people able to go out and do that. And as a result, people are running places that there is an element of human trafficking happening. You will find a please tip and cash jar. If you see that at the front of either a nail salon or a hair salon, that's an indication that someone who's working there is working under something called debt bondage. Anybody in here know what debt bondage is? There's 16 of you here. Anyone tell me what debt bondage is?
I think it is like indentured servants. They have a debt that with this person and they're supposed to work it off.
Exactly. Thank you, Laura. And the only thing about that, Laura, is that yes, they are indebted to the person who has paid to, get them that job. But then the thing is that they provide them housing because most times they've been brought in from somewhere else. They're feeding them most times. And so, that debt continues to mount. And so that person can never get away from that debt. That happens in the nail salons, it happens in hair salons, it happens in massage parlors. And the other thing I want to tell you guys today, in your communities, if there's a massage parlor and if it does not ever close, it's more than massages going on in that parlor. You can be sure about that. And that's one place where regulation exists that you can call 911 if you see that type of activity happening, and they will go in and make some changes there. They will shut it down. We've had several instances in Buckhead happen around massage parlors, and they have gone in and taken care of it. So with that having been said, I don't know how many of you guys like chocolate, but Nestle's, Hershey's, Cargill, all of the larger chocolate manufacturers are using children to harvest their cocoa beans. So that's distasteful, but people like chocolate. This is a $70 billion industry, y'all. And 20 years ago, these folk who manufactured this chocolate, said that they were going to make sure that kids were not working on these cocoa farms. And unfortunately, that has not happened. And so you continue to have kids working in hazardous working conditions like this little guy here. He can't be more than 10 or 12 years old. But do you see this blade that's in his hand? We know how precarious and precocious kids are. He could definitely cut off his fingers, cut off his hand, put his eye out. All of those things could happen. But what we're saying is that if you see something that says, let's hold the chocolate industry accountable for, what they're doing in other countries, sign the petition if you see something like that come across your email. And I am not playing videos because, hold on a second. I'm not playing videos because I want to make sure that I get to the end and have questions answered if you have them. Another place that this is happening is in the Cobalt industry, where you have kids working to make sure that we have what we need as far as cobalt is concerned, because cobalt is in our phones, it's in our laptops, it's in our computers, it's even in our cars. And they have, these are girls who are working in this industry, and it's a hazardous working condition as well. When I was looking for a video to talk about cobalt, I saw kids as young as 4 years old working in this industry. So this is another place where slave labor is happening and kids are being exploited to make sure that we have what we want to have. But y'all, I don't want us to get stuck in another country. Let's come a little bit closer to home. Let's talk about Wendy's, who a couple of years ago was fined for violating child labor laws. Let's talk about Chipotle Mexican Grill, who was also fined millions for violating child labor laws. We have people right here in these United States, like on the West Coast for sure, they have labor places where kids are working and they should not be working. Anybody curious about why Chipotle and Wendy's were both fined for violating child labor laws? You're curious about what that could have been? What were they doing? So when we talk about violating child labor laws, you know that children can only work a certain amount of hours at a certain age. Everybody know that? Kids have to be paid fair wage. But if you're not making the money, the kid would be the first one that you would cut his paycheck because he or she wants to be able to work. And they will continue to work even if you cut their pay. The other thing is that a lot of times people who are supervisors will actually sexually exploit kids who are working for them, but they're not going to tell because they don't want anyone to know that they've been vulnerable to this point. So these are some of the things that were happening in these restaurants here in the United States. And we know that, like I say, on the West Coast, you have places who they are, sweatshops. They are using kids to make sure that we get the things, once again, about supply and demand. And I told you earlier about the onion operation that happened down in South Georgia. What you see on your screen right now is a big bust that happened down in South Georgia around not only human trafficking, but sex trafficking as well, with men and women who were working on farms down in South Georgia. So this was just in December of 2021 that this occurred. So that's the labor trafficking. Learn something. Here's your see something. when you see people who you think are being trafficked, I'm going to give you a couple of numbers. Take a screenshot. They can be any gender. They can be children. They can be adults. They can be U.S. citizens. And yes, they can be foreign nationals. But there are some specific things that you're looking for. And here you have it on the screen, what you would be looking for as far as labor trafficking is concerned. If you get your nails done and your technician seems always anxious, fearful, submissive, avoids eye contact, and never talks to you, that's a reason to be concerned. But these are the things that you're looking for as far as labor trafficking is concerned. So if this happens, we want you to take this number and call these people, make a report, give as much information as you have that you have written down about what you have seen about labor trafficking, because a lot of the reason why this is not brought under control is because people are not reporting it. And most times it's just because people don't know to report it. So labor trafficking, here's your do something. You can become aware of your own consumer. So based on what you do every day, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. You can go to www.slaveryfootprint.org. Once you go to this website, you can take a little quiz. They call it a survey, but I call it a quiz. And what you will find out is how many people are working for you based on your everyday consumer habits. So I'll be honest with you guys, and I'll tell you, when I first started doing this work about 4 years ago, just training, I took this and I had 37 people who were dependent on me just based on what I do every day. So I started making some changes. Like I started, I told you about the fish. So I changed, making sure that I'm buying fish that is certified. But I am also a coffee connoisseur. So I actually started buying coffee. This came from Aldi's. If you know Aldi's, you know this brand, but this came from Aldi's. And Aldi's has chocolate as well that's actually certified sustainable. So this means that this is coffee that I'm sure that they didn't use slaves to get this coffee to me. The other thing is that you can buy what you do with the slaveryfootprint.org. You can begin to change your own consumer habits. This is another place where you can look and see what's going on as far as the Food Empowerment Project is concerned. It'll give you some tips as well on how to change your consumer habits. Hey, you guys, I know this is not something that you can do overnight. But what I am saying that you can start to make little changes in what you do as far as labor trafficking is concerned. Now, I'm not going to stay here long because I don't have a long time to stay here, but I do want to talk about organ trafficking. And a lot of people don't think that this is happening in the United States. They think this is something that's happening somewhere else. And yes, it does happen there, but it's happening here. And it's a whole ring of people who are involved in this. So organ trafficking is the practice of stealing or buying organs through exploitation. And what I'm going to say to you is that this is real. Dr. Oz actually had a show about 4 years ago where he interviewed a woman whose husband was found guilty of being in cahoots with a funeral home in their community, and he was stealing tissues and bones. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, wow. I mean, this is so relevant to this conversation, because the other thing I want you to know is that for people to steal organs, you don't have to be dead. Mm-hmm. So they can take your organ and you can still live. So that means that they could steal your organ and you could still live. So I do want to play.
The world is desperate for organs.
Okay, I want to play a little bit of this just so you'll know what organs they're looking for. Take a listen. All righty. Now take a listen.
The world is desperate for organs. If you need a new kidney in the US, you only have a 1 in 3 chance of acquiring it by legal means. People are prepared to pay a lot of money to save their own or loved one's life. So an international black market of organ procurement, trafficking, and surgery exists. There's a huge demand, a major supply problem, and you're just a wet sack of commodities. It's illegal to sell human organs in most of the world. Nearly every country runs on a donation system. You sign up to become a donor, and in the unlikely event that you die in a healthy, clean, salvageable way, your organs can be transplanted into others. One person could potentially save 8 lives and improve up to 50. But there aren't enough donors to meet demand. Half of all people will die on the waiting list. This desperation drives people to the black market, an international industry that exists to supply wealthy patients with new organs, no questions asked. The black market accounts for 10% of all global transplants. However unsavory, the sale of human body parts is big business. Lungs and livers are as susceptible to market forces as coffee and cocaine. A new kidney on the black market will cost you $100,000 to $200,000. This is significantly cheaper than a legal operation, but price will still depend on the location of the transplant and nationality of the donor. Well, vendor. The word donor implies consent. A new heart will cost around $120,000, but be prepared to pay 3 times that for the transplant. A new pancreas, $125,000. The liver is special. You only need to transplant part of the liver and it will regrow. So depending on how much you want, it will cost you between $10,000 and $150,000. A lung is between $150,000 to $290,000, but most people will need 2, and they have to be the right size. These are the big 5, the life-threatening organs that are difficult to get hold of legally.
So I'm not going to stay here long, you guys, but I do want to tell you that this is something that is happening here in the States. And we know that insurance is a big thing here in the United States, and the lack of insurance is even more of a big thing. And the access to this is great. So definitely make a note about organ trafficking. So we are halfway through. I am not going to stop. I would typically stop, but I need to just get this in about the sex trafficking, because it's so important for us to understand that this is something big that happens in our communities. So sexual exploitation, I like to talk about it in this instance when we're talking about our kids who are under the age of 18. I do a whole piece on this for college students, high school students, and middle school students. But what happens with our kids and what they have said to us is that with sexual exploitation, they never knew that certain things would happen, that they would be exploited because of their own behavior. And we know that traffickers and predators will take a kid, groom him and lure him. And it used to be that people would say that the vulnerabilities were that a kid was in foster care, a group home, and, you know, from a broken home and that kind of thing, being raised by a grandparent. But y'all, what I want to share with you today is that a kid who's being exploited, the vulnerability is that he or she has access, unsupervised access to the internet. So that's the vulnerability today. In 2022, it's not about the life happenstance. This is about the fact that they have access. And when they have access, then predators and traffickers have access to them. So let's just listen to a couple of kids talk about this.
I didn't know that my boyfriend wanted me to have sex with his friends.
I didn't know when I was communicating with that man online, I would need a safe place.
I didn't know that all the money and gifts he gave meant he wanted to have sex.
I didn't know boys could be victims too.
I didn't know how bad things could get when they closed down my college and I didn't have anywhere else to go.
I thought he cared for me.
I didn't know he would drag me across the country just to traffic me. I didn't know when he was actually a cool model that he was trying to lure me into sex trafficking. I didn't know that I was at risk.
I I didn't know that it could happen to me. I didn't realize that I was at risk. I thought he cared about me. I didn't know he was isolating me from my friends. I didn't know how bad things could get when I ran away. I didn't know all the gifts and money he gave me meant he wanted sex. I didn't know young people could be abusers. I didn't know it could happen to me.
So I don't want, I don't want, we are living in some precarious times, but what traffickers and predators know is that they can exploit our kids, and especially when kids run away. So that's one of the things that you need to make note of, is that when kids run away, they have no food, they have no shelter, and because of that, those are the things that they get exploited for, that's what the trafficker and the predator will provide. And one of the other things that they will do is they will use their images on something called the dark web. I don't know if you guys know about that, but they will use their images on those sites. And of course, the kids have no idea that this is something that is that's happening to them. So we want to just talk a minute about, the fact that also with kids who are trafficked, it's familiar trafficking that happened a lot during the pandemic, when things were shut down, that, kids were actually being trafficked by people that they knew, and it was to make ends meet, which, it was just something that happened. But there were reports that were coming in to the different entities stating that kids were, looking for help. And a lot of times I get moms who will say to me, I don't have to worry about this because I have a son. Quite contrary. No. Boys are trafficked too, but people don't get that because you don't hear about boys, because there are reasons why boys are not going to talk about the fact that someone is exploiting them. But these are some of the places where boys are being exploited. I mean, these are some of the places where they are approached, and these are some of the places where they're exploited. And yes, during the pandemic, there was a shift also with people who were predators. They shifted like from, contacting kids otherwise to contacting them online. I mean, they moved their business online. And so what you find here are statistics around what happened. And there was a 22% increase in kids calling the hotline, asking for help. They needed help. And these are some of the apps and the games that I just want to highlight for you that are targeting our kids. So if you've never seen these, if you'd like a copy of this, I can send it to your email so that you can have it to share with others. But these are a few of the games. And yes, these are some of the apps. During the pandemic, you saw, multi-generational people making TikToks. And that was just the thing to do. But y'all, this is a place where kids live. And this is where predators and traffickers talk to them. And yes, I'm not going to talk long about pornography, but it's something that causes a lot of what happens around trafficking. So when we talk about kids and pornography, I want you guys to know that kids, a lot of them are happening upon pornography, but others of them are looking for it. And then they go back and they look again and again. And what we know about pornography is that it changes the brain, it affects the heart, and it really affects the world. And so we talk about this because we need to talk to our kids about pornography and how, not to get involved in this. And so, this is just some of the statistics about that. I don't know how many of you guys know, it's 15 of you here now. How many of you guys know that Georgia has a sexting law? Put that in the chat for me, classroom participation, that you know that we have a sexting law. So we do have a sexting law. And when we talk about our kids between the ages of 14 and 17, these kids are sharing images online. So if you have kids within your circle of influence, they're creating and possessing images, but it's a misdemeanor. And if you're over the age of 18 and you're sharing these images, then this becomes a felony. And unfortunately, our kids don't know this because they are not talking about this a lot of times in our schools. This is a taboo subject. And so that's the reason why we continue to educate. And I know that they talked about, I was going to share a little bit about sugaring, and it's just the taste of what happens. Sugaring is something that it used to happen, it was on a different context. What has happened with sugaring now is that this has gone to an online platform. I mean, they actually have billboards in some cities and states that talk to kids about becoming sugar babies. And what sugaring is that there are men and women who have expendable income who are willing and able to give allowances to our kids to access the lifestyle and things that they want. So that's what sugaring is. There's another thing that's out there that I want to tell you about. It's called OnlyFans. The numbers on OnlyFans went up exponentially during the pandemic. What is OnlyFans? It's a website that celebrities had started to use to create content and get paid for it. But y'all, our kids are on OnlyFans. And they're doing things in their bedrooms and in their bathrooms that you would be just terrified to know that they're getting paid to do certain things in their rooms. So I just want to mention that to you. And the sex trafficking do something. I'm going to skip this video, but I definitely know that, you know something about sex trafficking now. I talk about predators and demanding prevention, because predators, like I told you at the beginning, they're at the base of this. They cause the demand. And so we definitely know that most times they just go back home. Basically, that's what happens. They go back home. But here is what Shared Hope had to say about this, and then I'll take it to an end.
We have an individual who's pled guilty now. He's looking at a 15-year mandatory minimum. And I've heard from several people who said that's way too long for someone trying to, just trying to buy sex with a child. Well, with Mr. Gravens during his online chats, he said, I see you have a 12-year-old. I really want a 10-year-old, but I'll take the 12-year-old if I don't have to use condoms and I can take pictures. Before people judge and say, you're being harsh on these guys, you should see what we see.
I was just sick, but it told me this. We have to dig in and fight.
I really believe that most buyers felt like they weren't going to get caught. And I think also that if they did get caught, nothing was going to happen to them.
Shared Hope conducted a study in 2014 of buyers, and we found that 26% of the buyers of commercial sex with kids, they did not spend a day in jail. We've got a serious problem of tolerance.
My own ignorance was my biggest barrier. And it wasn't until I became a member of the Governor's Council, it wasn't until I went to the Shared Hope Conference that I understood that even in our own community, we probably have a problem.
Juvenile sex trafficking is recruiting, enticing, harboring, transporting, obtaining, maintaining a minor for commercial sex. Some states are now starting to include purchasing and soliciting. That's to clarify that buyers are part of the crime of sex trafficking.
We think that there are two types of buyers who end up in situations where they're caught for trying to buy a minor. One, we think, is they just want to buy sex and they don't care if she's 17 or she's 18. And then there are people who are specifically looking for a minor.
We're getting buyers that are doctors, attorneys from law enforcement, people that make a substantial amount of money, to the guy that just came off the construction site.
My experience was that it was the stereotype that we always hear about, that they have families, that they have careers.
So we've had a physician, we've had an air traffic controller.
Older, younger, married, not married.
The age range of our offenders went from age 17 up to around 60, almost 70 years old.
The only really consistent trend we've seen is that they're male.
A disturbing trend that we found was that the younger the victim, the more money that was offered to have sex with that child. child.
Some of the buyer cases we've done, we absolutely have found evidence. They've brought tape, guns, zip ties, things along those lines.
There were several times that I was raped in a car and shoved out of a car.
They feel much more comfortable shopping on the internet. They can do it from their workplace. They can do it from their home. There's a large number of men out there that are looking for these girls, knowing that they can abuse them, rob them, rape them, and they're going to get away with it. And they're going to go on to their next victim.
And so what we're saying is that hopefully this will, not continue to happen because of the education piece that, we present as a part of EnligHTEn Talks, where we talk to communities and children and youth and young adults about human trafficking and exploitation. And so I'm going to actually just kind of stop right now and just get you, this is the slide that I told you about in case you see something, you can say something. To take a picture of this because there are a lot of missing young people in the state of Georgia. You see it in the news, but most people don't read the newspaper anymore. So they don't know that kids are missing. Because this is the work that I do, I see it all the time. And then if you know about a trafficking situation, or if you suspect something happening in your community, if you have like an Airbnb or something that's popped up in your community with cars coming in and out, what Uber drivers have told us is that, this is really lucrative business for people in Metro Atlanta for sure. And then the Homeland Security, the labor trafficking tip line, in case you see something, you can definitely say something about labor trafficking. So those are the things that, I leave you with. I thank you so much for your attention today. This is my contact information. If you'd like to schedule a training for your organization, or if you know people who could benefit from the types of trainings that I'm now doing, then definitely reach out to me. I would be more than happy to assist in this. So I'm here for any questions that you might have. I'm going to stop my share.
Thank you so much, DeAndre. I think I asked folks to put some questions in the chat since we're out of time, but I think most of the questions were really comments asking for your presentation because it was so insightful. And
so unfortunately, it's the intellectual property of the organization, and so I'm not able to share. I'm like I said, I'm more than willing to present it for you if you're open to that. So yeah.
Thank you. And that one thing that I know the Department of Administrative Services has done with their statewide training is the slide similarly to like you did, just sharing that with partners and pausing and telling people to put it in their phone right then. I know personally that's helped with me when I have the human trafficking hotline number in my phone, and when I go running and see something, I feel like I'm a little bit more armed.
Right. Did someone ask for that? Because those type of slides that are informational slides, I can definitely share if there's something that someone wants, or the slide that had the apps and the games on it. Those slides I can share. Did anyone have any questions, Emily? You said it was mostly comments.
Yeah, I think, let's see.
Can I ask a question while Emily's reviewing the?
Yeah.
I work in Whitfield County, Dalton, Georgia, and of course 75 highway, Interstate 75 goes right through there.
Right.
And we have been told that Interstate 75 and 20 maybe are some of the biggest pipelines for human trafficking. And I have a 14-year-old daughter who is quite petite and is very beautiful. And I have absolutely shown her videos on YouTube of children, human traffickers were trying to steal. I'm like, you cannot fool around with this. You'd be in someone's car and be gone.
Right. I don't know if you guys saw it yesterday, but Tamron Hall, because you were probably at work, but because I work from home, I was able to watch Tamron Hall yesterday, and she did a special. you know, and talking about how kids are being groomed. So one of the things that I do when I talk to kids about this, kids and young people, is that I talk to them about the fact that, unfortunately, y'all, this is not the world that we grew up in. There are traffickers planting kids in these classrooms. And yesterday, Tamron actually had a young lady who had been groomed on you know, at school. And she actually was trafficked, I think the girl said, for like 3 years. So, you know, kids need to understand that, you know, everyone that they talk to does not mean them well. And what I say to kids when, you know, that traffickers are wherever you are, there was a girl just last week who was trafficked from a basketball game, a pro game in Dallas, a Mavericks game. Y'all know, Matt, you know, they were in the playoffs, but she was trafficked. She was 16 years old. She had gone to the game with her dad. She went to go use the restroom and he never saw her again. So, you know, this is something that I know, you know, we've got so much going on. There's so much for us to compartmentalize. But one of the reasons why I continue to do this is because a lot of times people don't know. You know, it used to be a time when you could allow your 16-year-old to go to the restroom by him or herself.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the case any longer. Thank you guys so much, those of you having to jump off. Yeah, that's not the case any longer. So
this is Michelle, and I'm from Valdosta, and we're on that 75 down south, kind of headed toward Florida, Alabama, that way. And we're seeing, and I run a domestic violence shelter there and a sexual assault center, and we're seeing more and more human trafficking than we've ever seen before. And it's a different kind of service. A lot of people are not equipped or have the qualifications because they're not looking for housing, they're not looking to relocate, they're not looking for a job, they're not looking for specific help. We had one a few weeks ago and we took her to the hospital, and before the advocate, the doctor, could get back into the room, she fled in her hospital gown and left. And because she was scared. I was scared of getting killed. We've had hits put out on the you know, on directors around the state and domestic violence facilities. We've had threats made. We've had human trafficking victims come in the facility and they wanted to go back because they were scared if they found them what they would do. And so it's definitely a different type of service. I would love to have you come, you know, to our area. So I'm going to reach out to you as well. And because there's a lot of, like you said, they're getting younger and younger, and the grooming is getting younger and younger. It's not the typical 50-year-old, 60-year-old male anymore. It's very very different, but we're seeing a lot more of that. And so, you know, really being able to work with Georgia and being a certified human trafficking center down south, it just takes a lot. It's a different kind of service, and we're really trying to learn that. So thank you for your information today. It's very, even being in the work, it's very, very helpful. So we're definitely going to be reaching out to you.
I appreciate that. And I would love to partner so we can get in those schools down there and talk to these kids about how to, you know, keep themselves safe.
I agree.
That is huge. So one other thing that I just want to say, you know, a lot of times, and you've heard, you know, like mayors talk about Atlanta being an international airport. We have an international airport here. And I just want you guys to know that what Michelle just said, and I think Lori was talking about, the fact is that what is happening is it's not happening in the airport. This is happening on our highways.
Correct.
The way that they're getting people, moving people around is on our highways. And so we really, and because we have these major highways going through, you know, little small towns and stuff like that, you know, everyone has to be aware of it. And it's not just sex, it's both sex and labor. Mm-hmm. So they moved them from Florida at a certain point and they moved them up here. So yeah, it's huge. Emily, thank you so much again for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you guys for sticking around.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I know we went a little over, but I'm appreciative to all of you for staying, and thank you for the very heavy but very informative discussion, DeAndre, and and Michelle and all of those of you that are working in this space every day. I don't know how you do it, but I'm very grateful. As a fellow Georgian, I don't feel like I'm strong enough to do that work day in and day out, and I'm grateful to those of you that can. So thank you.